Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you, John, and all of the live team for having me on this call today. And for everyone that's here, thank you too for taking up your valuable time. I'm really excited to talk to you all today because today is really about one thing, how people working in live music can build income that doesn't rely entirely on ticket sales, as Gabby just said, because we all know how fragile that model feels right now. And it isn't theory. Everything I'll talk about comes from what I've tested, broken, fixed, and scaled over years of doing this inside festivals and events. Now, if we can just move on to the next screen. Can you see that screen?
Yeah, that's changed for me now.
Amazing. Okay. I'm sorry about this down the side screen, everyone. We've just been juggling with it. And yeah, this should work for what we need. So Live asked me to run this session because there are a lot of organisations that are asking the same questions, which is really how do we stabilise cash flow? How do we survive rising costs? And how do we how do we stop feeling like we're constantly firefighting? Because those are real realities within the sector at the moment. Sponsorships and partnerships and alternative income streams aren't a silver bullet, but they are definitely one of the biggest underused levers in the music industry. Just moving on to slide 3, the opportunity beyond tickets and the reality of the live sector. Margins are really tight and costs are rising, and audience are more and more price sensitive. Funding is much harder to rely on. And so, if ticket sales start to wobble or decline, then everything wobbles and declines. The opportunity here is about building income streams that sit alongside tickets and not replacing them, but supporting them. What we're going to cover today is that I'll walk you through the sponsorship landscape as it is now and the mistakes I see over and over again, why they happen, and then a simple framework that you can actually apply, even if you're a tiny team wearing 10 hats. The opportunity beyond tickets, I put there a little pie chart, which is just short, sort of shows some of the other income streams. That's just an indicator, but what we find with Sound City is we have quite an equal model of all those different things now with a large sponsorship. So this is why I'm so passionate about this subject. So who am I and who I am? I'm Becky Ayres and I'm the MD of Sound City, and I've been involved with Sound City since it started back in 2008, but I've been MD since 2018, so around 8 years. But my background has always been commercial. I came up through sales, sponsorship, and publishing, not events originally. And I think that really matters because it shapes how I approach income and it just determines really what I've learned and been able to bring into what I do now. And I think my perspective is different really because I had a media sales background and I've worked across a number of different media and publishing houses like Condé Nast and Hachette and Bauer that are now have now become their own entities themselves. But all of them were big media brands where everything was advertising was all about selling. So I learned how to sell, and I learned very much that selling is not always, it's largely about people giving to people, and it's about relationship building. But I also had training that I learned along the way as well. And so that was really important to what I started to do. And that training is what I brought into Sound City. It's what I brought now into the festivals and events and organizations I work with, which is a different approach to sponsorship, because I do find that people often approach sponsorship very emotionally rather than strategically, which is understandable because, that's where a lot of the time we are coming from, and we're all very passionate about our organizations and events because we work in music, and that is, and so that is really, really something that I do completely get. But what I want to impart is how to do that strategically. So just a bit of background on Sound City, and just very quickly. So Sound City is now the longest consecutively running new music showcase festival in the UK, and we're based in Liverpool, the world capital of music, which is something we never miss an opportunity to mention. And alongside the training program, alongside the festival, we also run training programs for young people. We run music careers days and year-round activity as well, and other shows that we do in other parts of the Liverpool City region. Across Sound City, we've generated over 10 million in combined sponsorship and funding. And in the last year alone, I've supported festivals and arts organisations to secure over £100,000 in new income, often from scratch and mainly with no prior sponsors or additional income. And so why sponsorship really matters now and why other income streams matter now as well. I think there is a perception that sponsorship is impossible right now. And I think that people do perceive brands to have no money and that it's harder than ever. But the reality is that there is a massive opportunity there, but it's underutilized by live music. Because sponsorship at the end of the day isn't free money and it's not a donation. And it's definitely not just logos on a poster. It's a marketing partnership. And when you treat it like that, everything changes. I think relying on tickets and funding alone is very risky. We all know how much, I know there's a lot of festivals and events and organisations that have gone for Arts Council funding in the last year or so, and that's got more competitive than ever. And there's a lot of competition for trusts and foundation as well, trusts and foundations as well. But sponsorship and other income streams, when done properly, are one of the few income streams that can grow year on year. But for that to happen, you've got to price it properly and prove value. So why are things different in 2026 and why are they exciting? I think what I'm finding is that more and more brands are actively shifting budgets away from not just traditional advertising, but also from the digital advertising is a very, very hard-won game, and experiences and live events and actual bricks and mortar assets are really exciting because they build community, content, and authenticity. And live music has buckets of this, but it's a gap that we don't always package that well. And so that's where the challenges come in. I think another thing that's happened is we're finding more and more that obviously the measurement has caught up. So you'll have sponsors and partners asking you to demonstrate ROI all the time, that magic word. And that is, with experiential things, it's not always that simple, but there are lots and lots of things you can do now to help that. So, ticket data, QR codes, tracking links, social engagement, data from ticket platforms. It doesn't have to be vague anymore. And so that's something that's really, really exciting now. It's that sponsorship's no longer just logos either. It's really there was a time when you would have logos attached to everything, but content, experiences, access, and storytelling are so key. We had Captain Morgan sponsoring a boat at Sound City. We've done stuff with Levi's where we had Loyal Kawana mentoring lots of young people. It's really there's lots and lots of ways you can engage now with sponsors to where they feel, where they can get that tracking of the data and they can get that understanding. And the logo branding, yeah, don't get me wrong, it is important, but it's just very much one part of the piece. I think the three biggest sponsorship mistakes that I tend to see and that I've made myself are one, not understanding audiences properly, two, outdated packages, and three, chasing money over value. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more. The mistake number one, not understanding audiences. I think this is the biggest one. Because if you can't clearly explain who your audience is and what they value and how they behave, then sponsors won't listen. A case study in relation to this is that at Sound City, our early sponsors were totally wrong for our audience because we had companies like insurance and solicitors that were companies that had money and they'd come and do things, but they wouldn't really get much return. And so it just wasn't, there wasn't an alignment there. And once we actually really started to analyze our audience, we shifted to working with brands like MailChimp, Spotify, Amplead, who are all services that support artists and people in all stages of their careers. And the relevance changed everything. So, what to do instead? It's really important to capture audience behavior, but you don't need perfect data. You need useful data. So ticket platforms, socials, surveys, either online or actually at your, at your event or through your organization. There is enough out there to paint a picture that sponsors do understand. And I think I've got, that was the wrong slide. I'll come back to that one. So mistake 2 was outdated packages. And platinum, gold, and silver packages are easy, but they're about you because they're ones that you put together, but they're not about the brand. And sponsors don't buy packages, they buy solutions to their marketing problems. And again, we've got a case study with Sound City as well, because we used to offer a menu of options, and it was always would go to sponsors and potential partners with tiered packages. But when we shifted to stop doing this, and we decided, no, I said, look, we're not going to send anything to people up front. We're not going to just give people a menu of what we think, or we don't want to kind of assume what they want. We shifted from tiered packages to doing bespoke brand activations. So we would have conversations, and I still do, and all of my team do, we'll have conversations with potential partners and potential brands, and we'll really discover what they want before we tailor anything for them. And the result in that has led to much higher, longer term partners, which has been better, much better for us and much better for the partners that we've worked with as well. And so, yeah, what works instead is very much bespoke proposals and actually, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's those bespoke proposals, because when conversations focus on audience and outcomes, you do unlock so much better partnerships, because we were able to attract brands like Levi's, Captain Morgan, Fred Perry, just by going to those sponsors first with having a conversation and really finding out who their audiences were and what their audiences wanted, so that we could then tailor proposals to them. So mistake number 3 is securing money and not securing value. And chasing that money over value is definitely a mistake, because I think if you focus on cash without thinking about delivery, then sponsors don't renew, and that's when sponsorship can just feel really, really hard. And what we did with TuneCore recently was that we got them to sponsor a tour that we're doing around there's a few small regional towns that we're working in, with some Arts Council funding that we got to take Brooke home, who's an amazing artist that's just toured in the US with Benson Boone. And she's doing a tour of places like Hartlepool and Barnsley and Wigan, an acoustic tour. And so we spoke to TuneCore, who were really keen to get their message out to artists in those different. They obviously have quite a lot of artists in big cities, but they felt like they didn't have that much penetration in smaller areas. So they worked with us, and everyone that applies to play for a support on the Brooke tour is actually getting to sign up, the opportunity to sign up to TuneCore as well. So we've had a really, really good alignment with that. And it's just, there are opportunities out there for brands and, for partnerships to have on tours as well. So that was so much better when we actually aligned that thinking with what and what TuneCore actually wanted. And so, one second. Yeah, so I think about just developing that partnership mindset is really important because sponsorship works best when it enhances the audience experience and delivers for the brand. Because if the audience love it, then that's going to just reap rewards always for the sponsor. So the more that you can sort of track the engagement and track and work on shared goals with the sponsor and report back to them and so that they're able to make the case to all their peers internally, that really, really helps to develop that partnership, and it leads to much longer term results as well. And you're able to have longer term relationships with sponsors. So just going back. So I think, but the thing is, none of this is your fault because at the end of the day, as I mentioned, I had the commercial background and I was trained in selling and sponsorship. But most organizers were never trained in this. And you're expected to be experts in programming, logistics, marketing, safeguarding, and ticket sales and income. But of course, this feels really, really overwhelming. And I totally get that. And so, what's really important is just to have a roadmap because you don't want to feel like you're having to work really, really hard to get other income streams in because it doesn't have to be something where you hustle and it's not luck. It always really comes down to a system. And so what I've developed is a formula to create 20K in 12 weeks, which is a system I've developed over years of doing it myself with 5 pillars that when combined can realistically generate 20K in sponsorship and other income within 12 weeks. And so it really breaks down into 5 foundations, which I'm going to talk through with you now. The first pillar is around audience and foundation and strategy, because you have to just first of all stop pitching to everyone. Don't go to everybody that you think has money and just pitch to them. Start with the audience, find out who your audience are, look at your ticket data, look at your socials data, understand, do some custom audience surveys as well. Go to your audience, at the end of midway through the year or just after your festival and ask them questions about the things that they really, really love and value about the festival, and also ask them about other things they like what social platforms they use, what do they stream, ask them about what other things they do in addition to going to either your event or your festival, your festival or attending your venue, and just ask them questions that are going to give you insights into who they are, because this is all really, really valuable information for sponsors and for to use for funding bids as well. And so sponsorship assets is the next one. I think one of the things that I find is done so often is pricing that is either overing or undervaluing the assets that you have. So you need to price based on value and not panic. So I know I've been in situations before where I've thought, oh gosh, what should I charge this sponsor? And then just plucked out a figure from the air. But I think if you can get a clear understanding of all the things that you can sell, for example, main stages, if you've got wellness areas, venue title sponsors, then by being able to offer and understand what you've got across your whole inventory of what you do, then you can partner with aligned brands, and then that creates much more value for the audience. Proposals is the third pillar that I always focus on. Just always remember never to send a proposal cold. As I mentioned when I went through that case study before, it's always about having a conversation first. And when you've got audience data, then you can actually go to a sponsor and say, well, look, I've got I know that my audience are music loving, people roughly, primarily aged like 26 to 30. And I know that, they're from Liverpool and they do, they love, they also love streaming. They also go to they go to cinema a lot. They like all these other things. And then that means that you can actually really have an engaged conversation with a potential sponsor and find out is that audience a fit for what they want to, for who they want to target as well. So never ever send a proposal before having a conversation. And the next thing I focus on, pillar 4, is outreach. That's really it's absolutely key that you do a lot of outreach. And so with that information that you know already about who your audience is and who the types of companies that you want to target, yeah, if you go to people, I actually use LinkedIn a lot for research, and I also find emails and do introductions, and this is something that I cover a lot. But it's always about going with that initial contact first, but then following up the follow-up is so key, because most deals happen after multiple touch points. And I just use like a Google sheet to sort of track who I'm going for, but it's always about following up and being persistent in a really, just being touching base with them, sort of telling them about what you're doing, telling them about what you're selling to them, but really just going through that and not being worried about following up, because that's often, it can take, a few times in the follow-up to do that, but it's worthwhile and it's so much easier once you know who you need to target and who you're going after, and then you can look at different brands and look at the types of competitors they have as well and go to all of them, but then you cut out a lot of that chasing of everyone by just being very focused because you know who your audience is. And the key, the fifth element, the fifth pillar that I always focus on is retention, because getting sponsors as a one-off for 1 year can be really exhausting, but long-term partnerships are really transformational. And when you've got, sponsors or partners on board and you can nurture them year round and do the reporting through the analytics that you have, then you can look at renewal, and you can also look at longer term sponsorships with them as well, and talk to them, because you know that you're giving them that value because you're giving them the right audience, and they're getting a lot of engagement from them as well. So I think I've got a free resource for you, but I wanted to say first that the key takeaways for this is really that sponsorship is about alignment, relevance, and delivery, and not luck. There is a system to it, and it's very much about, making sure that you do understand your audience and really, go after the right sponsors that are in tune with that. And I would say what to do next would be to pick one sponsor that you haven't approached yet and rethink how you might talk to them after today. And just to ground this in reality before we finish, this isn't theory. It's that over the past year where I've worked with a mix of organisations across the UK, from city centre showcase festivals, greenfield festivals, arts organisations, and also combined authorities and local councils who are trying to support the live sector. And collectively, those organisations have brought in over 100k in revenue using exactly the principles I've talked about today, but not with huge teams and not massive budgets, just a much clearer strategy, better alignment, and more confident outreach. But what's been really interesting is that the same fundamentals work, whether you're a grassroots festival or a publicly funded organisation, because the shape changes, but the practical skills are all the same. And very much the case always that establishing relationships and talking to people is the foundation of it all. And I've put together a free resource which is called How to Do a Brilliant Elevator Pitch, which is really just helps you get your first, just have a really, really clear thing to say when you're talking to sponsorship sponsors and partners. And it's just something that can be really helpful if sponsorship feels awkward or if you don't know exactly what to say. It's something that I always come up with myself whenever I'm speaking to people that I'm approaching. And if you want the resource or want to continue the conversation, just email me at beckyayres@soundcity.uk.com. And if you're part of Live, then keep the conversations going internally because it always works best when the knowledge is shared. And I'm really, really happy now to take questions as well.
Thanks so much, Becky. Super, super insightful, especially for me as someone who does a lot of this work for Live and the Live Awards. But yeah, does anyone have any questions for Becky? We've got 30 minutes. We've got plenty of time, so please don't be shy. Yeah, use this opportunity to pick Becky's brain.
Shall I stop sharing, Gabby?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to just, I can't see everybody, so do you
So,
mind?
Ira?
It is, yeah.
Hi there.
Uh, Hello, Gabby. That was perfect pronunciation, by the way. Usually I get people saying Aria, and it is not that. I digress.
That's okay.
What I wanted to ask is a lot of your examples were, I guess, about partnerships being related to music companies, Spotify being one. We do see at EG at least a fair few non-traditional and non-music partnerships, like banks, for instance, where their audience is very vast. American Express, another one. Like it's not a small demographic. So how do you approach those and how do you identify that this is a good fit when you know that a bank is not a typical choice?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. We do work with a lot of other like non-traditional music sponsors as well. Um, I think from one of those as a case in point is like you say, working with companies like we've worked with Barclays, for example, with Pride in Liverpool. And it all comes down to understanding the audience data. So what I would do with to understand, what banks to go with is when I'm surveying my audience is ask the question of who do they currently bank with and find out and dig in a bit more to that so you can find out who do they bank with and is there anything that they would like when choosing a bank as well. And so by doing that, you can find out the kind of banks we've actually had, a lot of success with doing that by just really finding out that, say more people do care very much about the ethical banking. And I think that's why Co-op Live was obviously, co-ops come so much into the live sector as well. I know it's the grocery, but that sort of we find that people do like those more ethical brands and that they do also like some of the newer type banking brands as well. So you can really find that out, and you can also share that information with sponsors. Say, for example, if you're speaking to Barclays, but more of your audience would like, the perceived ethical stance, you can say, well, actually, we found that our audience really value that ethical approach, and what are you doing within Barclays to do that? And how could you work with us and our audience to really get that message across? So you can kind of play that off a little bit with the sponsor by having that data and being able to share that with them, if that makes sense.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Hmm.
Say we go ahead with this whole bank example. Sometimes what some of these, I guess, more traditional, more established brands do is they want to rebrand. They want to seem cooler than they are perceived currently, which is probably why they reach out to entertainment. Doesn't need to be just music. So how does it fit with the general partnerships narrative when the brand alignment isn't obvious? That's because the brand is changing or trying to change the whole narrative around it.
Yeah, I think you could use though, it doesn't have to, like I said, I was using live events as quite a big example there, but there are, you can do the same with venues or same with other organizations where you've got different components. But I think you can just be part of that, helping with that rebrand as well. And one of the things that I think is really valuable is when you're dealing with, say, a different with different partners or sponsors like banks, you could get if you get them to look at, they don't have to just be, say, the title sponsor of what you do. Because is there a particular asset you were thinking of for this sponsorship? Was it like an event, did you say?
I was just thinking about Barclaycard and BST.
Mm,
This was the example I had in mind. I think at a time when they had a fair few protests because they were investing
yeah,
in, I want to say, guns.
yeah.
Don't quote me
There
on
has
that last part.
been and there's been quite a lot of fraught activity. There's been a lot of sentiment around that because it is something that they were known for supporting. So I think when they're rebranding, just being part of that rebrand conversation and talking about, well, you don't have to do the obvious with us. You could actually solve something that's a real problem for our audience. So they could actually be, so say, for example, you get feedback from your audience that they didn't like, that they felt, I don't know, the the entry, the actual entry on site was too slow, and that there was a lot of audience feedback about that. You could have Barclaycard managing all that area and being offering things in the queues, and it's not all about promoting the bank then, it's just about them solving a problem for the audience, if that makes sense. So you could actually say to them, look, just come on the journey with us, help us with the audience, help us solve a problem that they've had, and help us create something that's going to be really meaningful for them at BST this year. And so then you can that helps them with their rebrand, because they're able to really sort of get across that caring side of them, and then they can sort of solve a problem for what the audience has said is something that they found challenging the previous year, and they can come in to do an activation around solving that issue.
Brilliant.
So
There's a couple of questions in the chat, Becky. There's one from Chloe Merriman asking, could you please share more on what the tour sponsorship looked like?
yeah, so the tour sponsorship that we had with TuneCore for the Brookcombe tour, TuneCore actually came on to be to be the sponsor of that tour. And so they had their logo like on the tour posters and on all of the digital assets as well. But the thing that they really wanted to do was to get in touch with people because we had a lot of people applying to play for that tour that were the support for the supports. So they actually wanted to go and talk to those artists that might be applying for the support slots and actually reach the artists that were in different towns. So one of the things they really wanted to do was just to be able to get their offer to all of our database of artists. So we couldn't share the emails of the artists direct with them, but we could share we should share TuneCore's message. So that was one of the things that they really, really focused on. And then during the tour, they'll also have like on stage branding as well. They'll be offering they've got an offer that they want to offer the artists that are actually selected for the tour. But you can do that, there's a number of different types of sponsors that you can do that with. And it was finding out from TuneCore what they really wanted to get as a result of doing that tour. And we found it was just that engagement with the audience. So they weren't as concerned with with the actual branding. That was still obviously good for them because that helps them make the case to their to people that are within their teams as well, that are, justifying the spend. But their main thing was about that data.
Does that answer your question, Chloe?
Yes, thank you. That was great. Thanks so much.
No problem at all.
Right, next question. We have a question from Emily Agajari is asking, how do you find the right person to approach for partnerships and sponsorships? I know you said you use LinkedIn a lot, but do you have any other ways to reach out? How would you get them interested, and what do you look for on LinkedIn?
So with LinkedIn, I use like an approach with in a number of ways where I target, where I look for a number of different people within a team at a particular brand. And I also use trade magazines as well to sort of understand if there's agencies that brands might be using also. And I do a lot of the time LinkedIn is what I use for fact finding, and I use things like Rocket Reach to find emails for people. And it's very much I have like when I work with people like with organizations and festivals, there's that is a lot of what we do is going through the LinkedIn and the email approach. And there's a number of tried and tested ways that I've used to get to basically get people interested, and some quite some templates that I also use. But it's really just using when you're looking on LinkedIn, I'd say just go look at, go for like the marketing people and go for the brand people in the brand team. And it's just a case of, sort of finding out who they are. And then tend to use, yeah, to find out the email to do the contact and then start to do the reach out.
Thanks, Becky. Emily, has that answered your question? I can't see where
Yes,
you are.
thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Oh, we've got another hand up. Finley.
Hi, Becky. Thank you for that. I found that a really good presentation. I run a trade organization, and one of the trends I've seen has been there's a kind of lack of middle-sized companies, let's say. So there's a lot of large companies that can have sponsorship, and then there's a lot of small companies that have smaller pots of money. And one of the things I'm fighting against is things turning into like a logo salad. Have you found any strategies that make like good use of lots of smaller sponsors in terms of figuring out their moment in the sun and not having it all kind of in one space, if you like?
Yeah, that is a challenge, definitely, Finley. And what we do is be quite really, really sort of rigorous about who we do have on posters, because as you say, like when you've got lots and lots of smaller sponsors, it's often the smaller ones that want more because they've got, they don't have as big budgets. So what they have is a bit more, is more to them in lots of ways. So if, for sponsors that are the smaller ones, we're just very clear about what they can have. So we might say, well, you can have your, like I don't like to focus too much on just logos, but like you say, that it's just the logos are more important for being able to demonstrate, you know, the fact that they're there and all of those things, and just show that the brand is associated. But for example, I would say if with smaller sponsors, I say they're not all going to be on the poster. It would only be, say, the top 3 to 4 that are paying they're paying the top money that go on the poster, and then the others would go on the website. And then they all have different ones. So we have sponsors that are the smaller ones, and they might just be coming to do like some, to have a stand and hand stuff out. And then they might not have any logos at all on anything. But then, you'd have, say, like a bigger partner. So, for example, like we work with SAE as an education partner, and they have, they're across everything because they have a much bigger partnership. So I think just being really clear and just telling people, yeah, when you agree a deal with them, just send them exactly what they're going to get, and just you don't have to say you're not going to be on the poster. But if they ask you, just say, well, that's something that you'd be if you're paying in a higher category than you would be, you can be on the website, and then they get the other benefits that they want. But again, that's something that again that's as a try something I've kind of worked on over years, and it's just being really, really clear about what they do get, and then being able to say why they don't get it if they ask.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think I've got one for Becky if no one else has anything to ask yet. So my question is around, so at Live, we had a massive conversation when all the kind of boycotts happened recently at festivals. And so we brought the industry together to kind of discuss like what our feelings were around boycotting and how much should we be looking at ethical and kind of B Corp companies to align our brands with or our events with. And there was a real mixture in the room depending on who they were and how big the organizations were, etc., about what you can and cannot turn down and how a lot of our events can't exist without sponsorship, and so we have to put some of those kind of feelings aside. But what I just wondered what your thoughts were around, obviously it's kind of event depending, but do you go out when you're speaking to brands, do you have like a checklist of like ethical things or B Corp checklists, or how far do you feel like we need to go down that route to make sure that we are aligning with the best brands we possibly can?
It's a really, yeah, that is a really, really big thing now, Gabby. And I think one of the something that I had as a really interesting conversation a couple of years ago was when I was talking to someone at the Charity Commission, and they were saying, "What would you do if you?" I was saying, what would I do if I was being sponsored by somebody that wasn't ethical, like BA or not British Aerospace or or BP or something?" And they were like, "Well, what do you think you should do?" And I said, "Well, not take the money." And they were like, "No, you should take the money because you could actually change people's perceptions by aligning with that brand." And it's not that clear cut, of course, because you don't want to, there has been instances where, as we talked about before, Barclaycard's been one where people have boycotted things because of associations with, with certain brands. But I think and we find because we're part funded by Arts Council, there's certain things we wouldn't do. So we would never like accept money from like gambling companies, for example. Obviously that sounds quite extreme in some ways, but there are quite a few music companies where they potentially more could do that. So I think we B Corp comes up more and more now, and like lots more companies are B Corp certified. And I think within the sustainability space, that is really, really interesting as a space because there's lots and lots of companies that really, really want to use sponsorship to demonstrate their ethical brand values. So that's an area that's, again, there's a lot of people that I'm working with at the moment where we're really, really looking at that because if you can work with sponsors where they're able to show those brand values, and also some sponsors that maybe haven't had a good um, haven't had a very good reputation in that space. But as Era pointed out before, where they're doing a rebrand, then it's all quite individual. But I think it's being able to sort of put your hand on your heart and say, is this something that we really actually feels right, and trusting your gut over it as well, because sometimes you might have something that comes across your desk where you think, actually, I don't really feel like that's very aligned. And if you test it as well and look at who your audience is and think, is that something that my audience is really going to want? And by knowing what your audience likes and doesn't like, then you can test that really. And if it doesn't feel like a right fit, then don't go with it.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Thank you. Yeah, that it's very easy just to accept money that's being put on the table, even if, but it feels quite obvious as the ones you should say no to. But yeah, sometimes the information isn't shared by the brand in terms of, who they're funding in the back end and things like this, where you could never really find out until it's in the press, the following month or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had the same advice from the Charity Commission where they said you should just accept it and accept that you can do good stuff with the money, even if it is
Yeah.
potentially bad money, go and do some good things with it. And at least they're putting that into your hands to do some positive things with it. Because trying to change their whole system is kind of beyond our realms of what we can actually do. But yeah, maybe we can influence how they think by having those partnerships. So that's really, yeah, really useful. Thank you. We've got another question in the chat from Kristen Nielsen. Have you ever partnered or worked with non-UK brands that are looking to break into or expand their UK market?
Yes, we have worked with brands before, like Yamaha, for example, who we worked with their when because they're based in Germany. They wanted to come into the UK, and so we worked with them to do like it was basically they provided a lot of the backline for the festival, but we didn't want them to just give us kit. We got them to do an activation in the artist area as well. And with non-UK brands, definitely if they're looking to break into the UK, I know at the moment we've got through Modern Sky, which is our sister company. We manage Corrupt FM, and they're going on tour. They've been on tour in Australia, and there's lots of Australian brands that are kind of obviously because of the distance and everything, and they find it quite hard to get into the UK, but they're really keen to to get into it. So yeah, so there are there's certainly the UK is still, is still a market for brands to want. And I think again, it just does come back. I know I keep saying about the audience, but understanding who your audience likes and wants, what they're into just helps you determine that. And sometimes you might find a brand is overseas, but you can still approach it in that way of, doing that fact finding to find out who you need to speak to.
Thanks, Becky. That was really useful. I'd probably actually follow up with an email to you actually, because I've got a few more questions and a potential idea anyway, thank you.
No problem at all.
Jim, you've got your hand up.
I do. Thank you. Just a quick, I want to endorse what Becky said, sorry, about but in response to the international question and Finley's question about medium-sized things and Ira's earlier question about brands. I used to be head of sponsorship years ago for Carling, and the lovely thing there was we had a role, and I always used to think that O2 didn't really have a role at live events, and look how they've changed that. Having a phone at an event is an integral part. But Ira's question about like financial services thing, what Becky said about like giving them a role and as part of a rebrand, I think is brilliant, because I think that way, if you give someone an active role in the festival or the event, and it's actually meaningful rather than just badging, then that gives people credibility, and you're lending part of your brand attributes to them. And that tends to go down really well. But the other point I wanted to respond to Finley on was that like those medium sponsors, I agree with him, they're not out there as much, but actually it's because it's hard to find the people that are spending money. So you get like big brands that advertise as part of a media spend, and you got smaller ones, but that middle ground of partnership's been really hollowed out in the UK. And actually, what we need to do is kind of bespoke it a bit more for people and measure it. And the thought occurred that actually, and maybe Becky, this is a bit of a question for you. What really good measurement tools have you come across? And I declare an interest here. I'm working for a startup that we've been doing some brand measurements with supermarket chains and with participation events, without mentioning prominent London running events. And so I'd just be interested in other strong activation measurements that you've come across. Because I think that's the answer in that middle ground, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. And I think in the middle ground as well, I think looking at kind of sponsors that are close to where you are is very, very like, local to you is hugely beneficial. And it's a really, really good strategy because that's that sort of having that local connection is massively beneficial. But in terms of measurement tools, we do, we use we look at what we can from the ticket data, which is quite limited, but use that as a basis and then use like social data as well. But it's still a lot of audience surveying and doing that, sort of post event and at certain points in the year as well, and offering incentives for those, for those as well. But I'm always interested in seeing what else is out there. And we do find that, that using the analytics, there's lots of like our companies that were doing wristbands and RFID as well, you can get quite a lot of data through that. And you can obviously track what people are spending on drinks and food and that kind of thing. So those also are really good. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know what you've developed.
Sure, I'll email you, but I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to plug, but I just think it's really interesting that measurement we always struggled with at Carling. So getting actual genuine footfall data is quite fun. And like you say, the RFID stuff linked to spend is really cool because then you can track people. But yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, everyone. Any more questions? We've got 6 minutes left, so probably enough time for a couple more questions if we have any. Ira.
I have one more, but only if nobody else wants to go first.
I think you're good. Go for it.
Okay. I was wondering, how do brands measure and decide what's on their side, what's value for money and what's the return on investment? And also how much money are they willing to put towards something? So this event versus that venue versus that activation, what's that calculation look like and how is it done? Please.
So I think it depends what it is. So, for example, the example I used before, TuneCore, they're measuring like how many people they actually get signed up to their platform. And so that's something that they would use. But if you were looking at, say, drinks brands, a lot of the time that would be done through just what they'll a lot of drink sponsors are linked to sales. So, so a lot of the time you'll get drinks partners that'll do an activation, but they'll be linking it back to like, what the sales were through the drinks. And with like clothing brands, like working with Fred Perry or Levi's, they will often want to sample with the artists. So they'll sort of work out how many artists they were able to do the sampling with, because although that's not a sale, they will they will, if they've got artists wearing, their clothes, then that's, a result for them because they just want that brand association. But we give them data from like the audience, and we can do open rates, and we can do track who's looked at different things. But it doesn't, that the ROI, that all the things I mentioned before about the ticket sales data and about the social platforms and about looking at who's opened things and doing all that tracking and insight, they're all things that build up that picture. But what we find as well with Sound City, we're a 5,000 cap festival, but we bring in over 6 figures of sponsorship a year, and that's because we focus on all those tracking things, but we're also very clear about what people get in their packages, and we have lots of assets as well that we will talk to sponsors about, and we'll sort of help them solve problems. So we're able to generate more because we're not just providing, the ROI is quite, it's not just coming from one measurement, is what I'm saying. It's coming from lots of different ones. But when you can get sponsors involved in actually doing things for the audience, then that's they can, obviously they know how many people are at your festival. They might know how many people have bought something from them or how many people have opened something. But they're also being part of that activation, like, being part of a wellness area or being part of helping people to get onto the site, for example. That, and all the social media and all of the great coverage that comes around that, those things are really important as well. But it's just about, I think, in that initial conversation that you have with a sponsor or partner, is saying to them, what's important to you for this partnership? What are the different elements that you need to track and show results on, and then working out how you do those things. Does that help?
Where's Ira? Yeah, fab. Right, we are out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you so much. Becky, did you want to say anything before I kind of close off the session?
Just want to say thank you so much for being here, everyone. Please do email me if you'd like the resource, or if there's anything you'd like to ask after the session. And yeah, it was great to meet you all, and thank you as well, Gabby, John, and Live.
Thank you so much. I've just noticed there was another question in the chat from Ant Thompson. Ant, would you mind following up with Becky on email? Because I know people need to get off to other meetings. But thank you for the questions. And yeah, Becky's email is available for you. Brilliant. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We'll share the link for the video for this session on our website and on social. So please keep an eye out and share with your network to help us reach as many people as possible. But yeah, thank you everyone so much, and a huge thank you to Becky for running today's session. We really appreciate you sharing all of your expertise with us today, and hopefully everyone has some really useful takeaways so we can kind of continue to support a sustainable sector. But yeah, any questions, do fire them to Becky and keep an eye out for the link. And have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.